So I just want to cover a few more CSS properties that can really start to make your pages look unique and a little bit more modern. So we can apply properties like transitions, rounded corners, shadows, things like that that'll really give your pages texture and give it more of like a modern design. So one of the things we can do, let's target this div right here. So we have this div, and inside of it we have an H1. And if yours doesn't have an H1 in there, you can go ahead and change this. Just pause the video and kind of copy this down. And we can target it with this class name, right? So I'll go ahead and target it in the style sheet like this with the dot syntax. And then what I'll do is I'll give it a border. Let's make it 2 pixels, solid, and gray. So now when I refresh it, it's got this border, and we could maybe start to think of this as like the logo of our page or just some main call out. Maybe let's change that to logo for now. So if I save it and I refresh, now you can see, okay, this looks starting to look kind of like a header. So if we wanted to give some rounded corners, you can do that with this border radius property. And we could say 6 pixels just for a little bit more of a clear, drastic look right there. So there you go. You've got a 6 pixel radius, right? So that's pretty cool. We're able to give it a rounded corner, so that way we're not limited to just, if I zero this out, strict, sharp corners. So you do have that kind of flexibility in CSS. So I want to show you something else that's really cool. You can do these transitions. So let's say I've got a link in here. We'll just create a link with placeholder destination for that link. And then let's put H2 inside of it. And we'll say, just put some placeholder text in there. So we have this link, and links have what we call pseudo selectors, and we can learn more about those. Again, remember, you can go to this website, W3 Schools, and if you go down to the selector reference at this website, you can read about how you can control the look of a link before it's been clicked, while you're holding the click button on the link, or what it looks like after it's clicked, right? And so if you've kind of noticed around the web, after you click a link, it usually takes on a different color by default. That's just how HTML works. So we can control that, and we can override that by using these special selectors here. And the way we do that, let's just target this link here. Without using a class name, we'll just target the actual link itself. And just for practice, if we wanted to specifically target the link that's inside this parent div, here's how we would do it. Again, we're following these selector rules here, right? So let's use this one right here where you place one element and then space and then another element. So I'll say the class name of that parent div and then just space and A. And so what that's going to do is target only the anchor tags that are inside this parent div. So if I had another one sitting out here, this one won't get affected. So it's down there, so what we're about to apply won't affect this bottom one, only this one. So this is just a good practice, and it's a good thing to do. Just make sure you're not affecting all of the links if you don't want to. So what we can do is we can say, okay, on the hover state, you have this colon and then say hover. So whenever we hover it, let's change it to look like something else. And so we can do that by saying, okay, let's maybe change it to color red when we hover it. So if I save that and refresh, you'll see now whenever I hover over that link, it's going to be red. And notice too that when I hover over here, we're getting red, and it's because of the way we placed this anchor tag. We're wrapping the anchor tag around the H2. And remember, H2s are block level elements. That means they have display block by default. And we know that display block consumes the full width available. Okay, so we could get around that by changing that to display, inline or inline block. And why don't we do that just for the sake of practice? So let's target this particular h2. And we could do that by looking here and saying, okay, there's this parent div, and we know that there's only one h2 inside this parent div. So we could easily target it by doing something like this. Let's say display inline. We could also just use inline block. So now when I hover over here, it's not going to turn it red, just directly over the link itself. Okay, so now let's talk about transitions. We can actually use transitions to fade that color in. And the way we do that is we simply say, okay, let's grab this anchor tag, create a rule for it. We'll say color blue. So by default, that link should be blue. And when we hover, it should be red. Now, there's also a visited attribute, so we can add that as well. So let's see what it looks like. Since we've already clicked on it, it's taking on a certain color when it's been visited. So if I save it now, there. Okay, so now when whether it's been visited or not, that link will always be blue. That's what these rules say. And then we have this color here that says when we hover over it, let's make it red. Okay, so now if we wanted to add some transitions to it, we can add right here, we can say transition, and we'll transition everything. So we'll say transition all. And we'll set it to a 2-second transition, fairly long transition. So now when I save it and refresh, you'll see as I hover over the mouse, it takes when I use the mouse to hover over the link, you'll see it takes about 2 seconds to transition its color from the blue that we defined to the red from the hover state. Okay, so that's a little bit about transition, and you'll see transitions to make your designs look nice and clean and smooth, and you can use transitions for all kinds of things down the line. So just a few things to point out. Remember, you don't have to memorize all of these CSS properties. You can read about them using this website, W3 Schools. And, you know, for example, the border radius, you can read about it here and get some practice. And remember, try to use this more as a reference when you're first starting out. Some of the common ones will start to stick. You'll start noticing that you're memorizing, you know, a lot of the common ones that you come across just by second nature. But remember, use this website as a reference when you're first starting out. And just a few more helpful tips about CSS. You can also find websites that generate CSS for you. So for example, there is the CSS gradient generator. If you just look for CSS gradient in Google, you might find a generator website where you can kind of, you know, just copy down some code. So for example, you could copy all of this right here, or simply just hit this copy button. And then let's go ahead and target this background here of this logo header thing. And we can just believe that would be this right here where we added the actual border, and just paste that in. You can hold shift when you paste to get it to paste in aligned properly. And then now when we hit save and refresh, you'll see there we go, we've got a gradient in there. Not the nicest looking gradient, but that's kind of, you know, you can see how complex these gradients can get. Obviously, again, you can read about them on the web, but this is kind of a shorthand way to get to something. You can even style it on your own here first, and then the code will change accordingly. So there are websites like that that are really cool and give you some cool techniques. Likewise, there's even the box shadow property, and there are generators for it. So for example, I could just copy this code here, and now if I paste that in, remember if you hold shift and paste it, it pastes it in kind of better aligned. If I hit save and I go back here and refresh, now we've got an actual box shadow in there. So we've got a little bit more of a look. Again, you have to kind of learn to be subtle and, you know, be really careful and choosy in terms of how you design your pages. And of course, like I've mentioned, the Bootstrap library will kind of pre-package a lot of this code for you and make it very easy to integrate. So, you don't have to worry too much about trying to learn all this stuff on your own right away, but it is great to be aware of this kind of stuff. Now, one thing I just want to point out is when we pasted in this box shadow, you'll see that we added it 3 times. And we added it once with the MOZ in front of it, and then this WebKit prefix. These are called prefixes or vendor prefixes, and they're helpful when you're trying to get consistency across browser. This brings up a really important point in that not all browsers are made the same, right? So this MOZ targets the Mozilla browsers, and WebKit targets any browsers built with the WebKit technology. You can read about that by Googling it or just looking up, vendor prefix for browsers or for CSS. And you'll see that, sometimes you do need to add those in when you are adding certain CSS rules. And that's just because every browser is different, and this kind of helps make sure that the browsers rendered them properly. So that's a little bit about some extra properties that'll really help to make your page shine.